The dangers of the Cascade volcanoes. Scientists argue there is more comprehensive studies needed, and they are on the USGS high threat listing. As we know, they're in the Cascadia subduction zone. We've recently had a lot of earthquakes on the Blanco fracture zone and the Mendocino fault. 6.2 a couple of days ago, I think December 20th. And we also have quite a few of these volcanoes erupting the past 200 years. Silver Throne, Baker, Glacier Peak, Rainier, Mount St Helens, Hood, the Three Sisters, well, that was about 2,000 years ago, but we also have Shasta and Lassen. Lassen, we know, is just across from the Mendocino fracture zone on the Walker Lane fault system. Not enough is being done to observe these volcanoes. This is by Mark Floyd, Oregon State University. The string of volcanoes in the Cascadia Arc, ranging from California's Mount Lassen in Northern California, in the south to Washington, Mount Baker in the north, have been studied by geologists and volcanologists for over a century, spurred on by spectacular events such as the eruption of Mount Lassen in 1915 and Mount St. Helens in 1980. Scientists studied most of the Cascade volcanoes in detail, and they're seeking to work out where the magma that erupts comes from and what future eruptions might look like. But mysteries still remain about why nearby volcanoes often have radically different histories of eruption or erupt different types of magma, and now scientists would like to find out why, both for the Cascades and for other volcanic ranges. Now, PNSN shows us that in the past 30 days we've had 13 earthquakes at Mount St. Helens, 5 earthquakes in the last 30 days, Mount Rainier, 4 earthquakes in Mount Hood, and Newberry has 1 earthquake in the past 30 days. So the most active is Mount St. Helens and Rainier. So that's, of course, Cascade volcanoes. Now, in a perspective essay published in Nature Communications, the scientists argue for more synthesis research looking at the big picture of volcanology to complement myriad research efforts looking at single volcanoes. The study of volcanoes is fascinating in detail, and it has largely been focused on research into individual volcanoes rather than the big picture, said Adam Kent, a volcano expert at Oregon State University. He's the co-author of the essay. He said, "We now have the insight and data to go beyond looking at just Mount St. Helens and other well-known volcanoes. We can take a step back and ask, why is St. Helens different from Mount Adams, and why is that different from Mount Hood?" The study takes a novel approach to the topic. One way to do this is to consider the heat it took to create each of the volcanoes in the Cascades Arc, for example, and also compare this to the local seismic wave speeds and heat flow within the crust, Kent said. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. And Kent said, we now have the insight and data to go beyond looking at Mount St. Helens. The study takes a novel approach. One way is to consider the heat it took to create each of the volcanoes in the Cascades Arc, and also compare this to the local seismic wave speeds and heat flow within the crust. Linking these diverse data sources together this way gives us a better glimpse into the past, but offers some guidance on what we might expect in the future, Kent said. The need for studying volcanoes more thoroughly is simple, noted Christy Till of Arizona State University, lead author of the Nature Communications study. Worldwide, almost 1 billion people live in areas at risk from volcanic eruptions, 90% of which live in the so-called Pacific Ring of Fire. The subduction of the Juan de Fuca tectonic plate beneath the North American plate is the ultimate driver for the formation of the Cascades Range, as well as many of the earthquakes the Northwest has experienced. Subduction results in deep melting of the Earth's mantle, and the magma then heads up towards the crust and surface, eventually, of course, reaching the surface to produce volcanoes. But there are differences among the volcanoes. The researchers note, including the north and south of the Cascades Range. The volcanoes in the north stand out because they stand alone, Kent said. In the south, you also have recognizable peaks like the Three Sisters and Mount Jefferson, but you also have many thousands of smaller volcanoes like Lava Butte and those in the Mackenzie Pass area in between. Our work suggests that together with the larger volcanoes, these small centers require almost twice the amount of magma being input into the crust in the southern part of the Cascades Range. Now, why is this important? Well, if you live around a volcano, you have to be prepared for hazards, and the hazards are different with each type of volcano, Kent said. The northern Cascades are likely to have eruptions in the future, but we know where they'll probably be. At the larger stratovolcanoes like Mount Rainier, Mount Baker, Glacier Peak. In the south, the larger volcanoes might also have eruptions, but then we have these large fields of smaller, so-called monogenetic volcanoes. And for these, it's harder to pinpoint where future eruptions will occur. The field of volcanology has progressed quite a bit. The researchers acknowledge and the need now exists to integrate some of the methodology of individual detailed studies to give a more comprehensive look at the entire volcanic system. The past is the best informer of the future. Kent said, if you look at the geology of a volcano, you can tell what kind of eruption is most likely to happen. Mount Hood, for example, is known to have had quite small eruptions in the past, and the impact of these is mostly quite local. Crater Lake, on the other hand, spread ash across much of the contiguous United States. Crater Lake. He said, what we would like to know is why one volcano turns out to be a Mount Hood, while the other develops into a Crater Lake, with a very different history of eruptions. And this requires us to think about the data that we have in new ways. The 1980 eruption of Mount St Helens was a wake-up call to the threat of volcanoes in the continental United States, and though noteworthy, its eruption was relatively minor. The amount of magma involved in the eruption was estimated to be 1 kilometer cubed. That's enough to fill about 400,000 Olympic swimming pools. Whereas the eruption of Mount Mazama 6,000 years ago, that created Crater Lake, was 50 kilometers cubed, or 50 times as great as Mount St. Helens. The researchers say the process of building and tearing down volcanoes continues today, though it's difficult to observe on a day-to-day basis. If you could watch a time-lapse camera over millions of years, you'd see volcanoes building up slowly and then eroding fairly quickly, Kent said. He's the OSU's College of Earth, Ocean and Atmospheric Sciences. He says sometimes both are happening at once. Now, which of the Cascades is most likely to erupt? The smart money is on Mount St. Helens because of its recent activity, but many of the volcanoes are still considered active. As we said, Mount St. Helens has had 13 earthquakes in the past 30 days. Rainier had 5, Hood had 4, and Newberry had 1, for example. As you can see, Mount St. Helens is the most active. Now, Kent said, I can tell you unequivocally that Mount Hood will erupt in the future. I just can't tell you when, Kent said. For the record, Kent said the odds of Mount Hood erupting in the next 30 to 50 years are less than 5%. This is by Oregon State University. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.